kindnesses and cruelties, the fragile blue sphere photographed decades ago by distant probes, and he felt a surge of defiance mixed with pride, because despite everything, humanity was more than its violence, and somehow that emotion transmitted outward, resonating through the field around him, prompting a subtle shift in the luminous geometry of the colossal craft, as if it were recalibrating its model of his species based on this single pilot's unfiltered conviction. And the smaller objects drifted closer, their surfaces rippling until one extended a filament of light that touched the canopy of his cockpit, passing through matter without resistance. And Mercer felt his consciousness expand beyond the confines of his body, not leaving it, but overlapping with something vast. And in that overlap, he perceived the Watchers not as machines, nor as organic beings in any familiar sense, but as distributed intelligences woven from quantum substrates, entities that experience time non-linearly, for whom centuries were comparable to heartbeats. And he understood that direct physical contact was impossible not because of hostility, but because the difference in scale and structure between their forms of existence would annihilate the fragile chemistry of a human body. So they communicated through curated projections, through vessels shaped to minimize ontological shock. And then came the pivotal exchange, the silent question that pressed against him with gentle insistence. Would humanity choose collaboration over isolation if presented with evidence that it was not alone? And Mercer knew the answer was not simple, that governments would conceal, populations would panic, factions would weaponize the revelation. Yet he also knew that secrecy had already begun to fracture under the weight of leaked footage and multiplying encounters. And he sensed that the Watchers had calculated probabilities branching like fractals, some paths ending in catastrophic conflict, others in unprecedented unity. And in that suspended moment above the Pacific, held between sky and sea by forces beyond physics, Mercer made the only decision available to him as an individual within a species still arguing with itself. He projected sincerity, a willingness to learn, a plea for time rather than power, and the field around his aircraft pulsed in response. Not agreement, but acknowledgement. And the colossal structure began to ascend, folding dimensions in ways his mind could not track, shrinking not through distance, but through altered perception until it was once again a faint distortion among the stars, and the three luminous probes repositioned themselves before him in a line, then accelerated upward in perfect silence, vanishing as they had before, yet leaving behind a final imprint in his thoughts, a set of coordinates not on Earth, but in space, a region near Jupiter where anomalous energy readings would soon be detectable by civilian telescopes, a breadcrumb placed deliberately for humanity to discover on its own, to ensure that the next step toward disclosure emerged from scientific inquiry rather than military decree. And as Mercer's jet engines reignited and control returned to his hands, he realized that the encounter had not been a spectacle, but a negotiation, subtle and provisional. And when he landed at the carrier, the debriefing that followed was unlike any prior session, because even before he spoke, the radar officers reported identical data spikes near Jupiter. Amateur astronomers were already posting unusual observations online, and the machinery of suppression hesitated in the face of too many witnesses, too many sensors, too many independent confirmations. And within days, the world's leading space agencies announced a joint investigation, cautious in language yet unable to conceal from a secure facility. As headlines multiplied, as debates ignited across continents, as fear and wonder braided together in the collective psyche of humanity. And though officials attempted to frame the phenomenon as unexplained astrophysical anomalies, the evidence mounted inexorably, telescopes capturing geometric silhouettes against the gas giant storms, instruments detecting energy signatures that defied known propulsion models. And in the midst of that global reckoning, Mercer felt again the quiet resonance in his mind, faint now but present, a reminder that the Watchers remained attentive, and he understood that their role was not to save or destroy, but to observe the choices humanity would make when confronted with undeniable proof of a wider cosmos inhabited by intelligences older and more patient than any empire on Earth. And as weeks turned into months, the revelation did not fracture civilization as catastrophically as some had feared, but instead catalyzed an uneasy yet profound shift, rival nations sharing data openly for the first time in decades, religious leaders reframing doctrines to accommodate a populated universe, artists and scientists collaborating on projects that imagined humanity's place among the stars. And though conflicts did not vanish nor mistrust dissolve overnight, there emerged a subtle awareness that the audience beyond Earth had altered the stakes of every decision. And Mercer, now quietly reassigned to an advisory role bridging military and scientific communities, would sometimes step outside at night and look up at the faint glimmer near Jupiter, knowing though it shimmered, there was not a fleet poised for invasion, but a threshold. And he would remember the immense crystalline silhouette suspended above his aircraft and the layered histories it had shown him. And he would feel both humbled and invigorated, because humanity's story had not been ended by the unknown objects that once chased his jet, but expanded, reframed within. A GA. Commander Elias Mercer had flown combat missions over deserts that shimmered like molten brass and oceans that looked calm until they swallowed ships whole. But nothing in his 20 years of service had prepared him for the night the sky turned into something alive, something aware, something that did not merely contain aircraft but seemed to watch them as they cut across its vast black skin. And it began as an ordinary training exercise over the Pacific, the carrier strike group cutting through the water below like a blade, while above it a lattice of jets traced invisible geometry in the darkness. Radar operators half-bored and half-focused as they tracked routine blips, until one of those blips refused to behave, dropping from 80,000 feet to sea level in less than a second, then hovering, then accelerating again with a precision that mocked physics. And at first they thought it was a glitch, a phantom echo, the sort of electronic mirage that sometimes haunted advanced systems. But then Mercer saw it with his own eyes, a pale shape ahead of his Super Hornet, smooth and oval, without wings, without exhaust, without any visible means of propulsion, gliding over the ocean as if the air were water and it were born to swim through it. And he felt a chill crawl up his spine despite the cockpit's climate control, because the object was not simply flying, it was reacting, pivoting the moment he adjusted his course, anticipating him, and when he pushed his engines harder, the object did not flee in panic or challenge him in aggression, but matched him effortlessly, like a dancer indulging a child's clumsy steps. And then it darted sideways in a movement so abrupt and impossible that Mercer's stomach lurched as if he had been the one flung across the sky, and the radar screamed warnings that made no sense, velocities beyond calibration, vectors that contradicted inertia. And in that moment, Mercer realized he was not chasing the object anymore. It was leading him, drawing him away from the formation, away from the carrier, away from the comfortable certainty of human command, and into a corridor of night where the stars themselves seemed to dim, and his wingman's voice crackled through the comms, strained and disbelieving, confirming visual contact, confirming the same impossible maneuvers, confirming that this was no illusion, no software error. And then the object halted midair, dead stop, causing Mercer to overshoot before he could compensate. And as he banked hard to reacquire it, he felt something else, something intangible, a pressure in his skull like the onset of a migraine, accompanied by a whispering hum that bypassed his ears and resonated directly within his thoughts. And though he told himself it was adrenaline, hypoxia, stress, he could not ignore the strange clarity that followed, as if some external presence were sifting through his memories, brushing against fragments of his childhood in Montana, the scent of pine forests. The first time he had watched a thunderstorm roll across open fields and felt small beneath the universe. And the object began to glow. Faintly, not with fire or heat, but with a soft internal luminescence, and Mercer saw, impossibly, that its surface was not solid in the way metal is solid but fluid, rippling subtly like mercury disturbed by unseen currents. And then it accelerated straight upward, vanishing into the upper atmosphere before any missile lock could be achieved, before any protocol could be enacted, leaving Mercer and his wingmen suspended in stunned silence above an ocean that suddenly felt too quiet, too ordinary, as if whispering about classified projects that did not match what they had witnessed. And Mercer found himself unable to articulate the most unsettling part, the sensation of being examined, of being known, because it sounded irrational, unprofessional. Yet over the following weeks, similar encounters multiplied, objects appearing on multiple sensors, shadowing jets, pacing destroyers, plunging into the sea without a splash and emerging miles away in seconds. And the brass convened closed-door meetings where words like foreign adversary and breakthrough propulsion were repeated like mantras meant to banish fear. But none of those explanations fit the data. None accounted for the sheer indifference the objects displayed toward human weaponry, as if missiles and tracking systems were toys laid out by a younger species, and the media caught wind of rumors. Footage leaked. Grainy infrared videos showing featureless shapes darting against the sky, and the public argued in predictable patterns, skeptics dismissing it as misidentification, believers proclaiming vindication, conspiracy theorists weaving elaborate narratives. Yet Mercer remained trapped between certainty and doubt, because he had seen it, had felt that mental pressure, that invasive hum, and he began to dream of it at night, not as a threat, but as an invitation. Standing in an endless hangar where rows of identical white craft hovered silently, their surfaces reflecting not light, but memories, and in the dreams, a presence beckoned him forward without words, conveying curiosity rather than hostility, and he would wake drenched in sweat, unsure whether he feared the return of the object or longed for it. And months later, during another exercise, this time in the Arctic where the sky was a bruised twilight even at noon, the objects appeared again, multiple this time, forming a loose triangle around his squadron, moving in synchronized arcs that suggested coordination beyond human reaction times, and one of a yo, whispering about classified projects that did not match what they had witnessed. And Mercer found himself unable to articulate the most unsettling part, the sensation of being examined, of being known, because it sounded irrational, unprofessional. Yet over the following weeks, similar encounters multiplied, objects appearing on multiple sensors, shadowing jets, pacing destroyers, plunging into the sea without a splash and emerging miles away in seconds. And the brass convened closed-door meetings where words like foreign adversary and breakthrough propulsion were repeated like mantras meant to banish fear. But none of those explanations fit the data. None accounted for the sheer indifference the objects displayed toward human weaponry, as if missiles and tracking systems were toys laid out by a younger species, and the media caught wind of rumors. Footage leaked. Grainy infrared videos showing featureless shapes darting against the sky, and the public argued in predictable patterns, skeptics dismissing it as misidentification, believers proclaiming vindication, conspiracy theorists weaving elaborate narratives. Yet Mercer remained trapped between certainty and doubt, because he had seen it, had felt that mental pressure, that invasive hum, and he began to dream of it at night, not as a threat, but as an invitation. Standing in an endless hangar where rows of identical white craft hovered silently, their surfaces reflecting not light, but memories, and in the dreams, a presence beckoned him forward without words, conveying curiosity rather than hostility, and he would wake drenched in sweat, unsure whether he feared the return of the object or longed for it. And months later, during another exercise, this time in the Arctic where the sky was a bruised twilight even at noon, the objects appeared again, multiple this time, forming a loose triangle around his squadron, moving in synchronized arcs that suggested coordination beyond human reaction times, and one of a yo, invasion, but of irrelevance, of confronting a presence that rendered geopolitical rivalries trivial. And as he left the meeting, he received a message on a secure device, coordinates, and a single line of text that read, "They are returning." And though no signature accompanied it, he recognized the encryption as military. meaning someone within the system was choosing disclosure over silence. And he felt the familiar mix of dread and anticipation as he prepared once more to take to the sky, aware that the next encounter might not end with the objects simply vanishing, aware that the boundary between observation and contact was thinning like ice under persistent sun. And as his jet roared off the runway into a crimson sunset that bled across the horizon, Mercer could not shake the conviction that humanity stood on the brink of an answer to its oldest question. And that answer was already watching, already calculating, already deciding what to do about the violent, brilliant, fragile species that had finally noticed it looking back. When Commander Elias Mercer's jet cut through the crimson edge of the atmosphere, that evening, he carried with him not only classified directives and encrypted coordinates, but the unbearable weight of anticipation. The sense that history was no longer a slow accumulation of events, but a precipice rushing toward him at Mach speed. And as he approached the designated sector, a desolate stretch of airspace above the North Pacific where commercial routes were non-existent and satellites had been quietly redirected, his instruments began to flicker, not with malfunction, but with interference so deliberate it felt curated, as though some unseen intelligence were adjusting the signal-to-noise ratio of reality itself. And then the sky ahead fractured into geometry, three pale objects forming a vast equilateral triangle around his aircraft, their surfaces shimmering like liquid opal beneath starlight, pacing him without turbulence, without sonic disturbance, defying every aerodynamic law he had ever studied. And this time there was no chase, no evasive ballet, because the objects were not testing his limits but inviting stillness, and Mercer felt that pressure return inside his skull, stronger now, yet no longer painful, a resonance aligning his thoughts with a rhythm that was not entirely his own. And in that resonance came images, vast starfields seen from impossible vantage points, planetary systems collapsing and reforming, civilizations rising in brilliant bursts of energy, before dimming into silence, not as warnings, but as context, as if he were being shown the library of cosmic history to understand that humanity's story, fierce and beautiful though it was, occupied only a single fragile shelf. And he realized that the smaller craft surrounding him were indeed probes, interfaces designed to translate between incomprehensibly advanced entities and a species still bound to combustion engines and political borders. And as that understanding settled into him, the triangle opened, revealing above him the shadow he had glimpsed months earlier, now unmistakable, a colossal structure suspended at the threshold of visibility, its outline spanning miles, faceted like a crystal cathedral forged from starlight and mathematics, not looming in menace, but existing with serene inevitability. And Mercer's breath caught as his jet's engines powered down without his touch, the aircraft held aloft by a field that felt like gravity rewritten, and he should have panicked. Protocol demanded it. Instinct screamed for it. Yet instead he felt a profound calm, as if the presence enveloping him radiated not conquest but curiosity, and within that calm a communication unfolded, not in words but in layered meaning, conveying that humanity had reached a developmental inflection point detectable across interstellar distances, that the detonation of nuclear weapons and the exponential bloom of electromagnetic transmissions had marked Earth as a node of emerging intelligence, and that the Watchers, as Mercer instinctively labeled them, were not singular invaders, but part of a network of observers seeded throughout the galaxy to monitor civilizations as they crossed thresholds of self-destruction or transcendence. And the message carried neither judgment nor urgency, only assessment, and Mercer understood with chilling clarity that they were evaluating whether humanity would stabilize into a sustainable participant in a broader cosmic ecosystem or spiral into extinction before achieving equilibrium. And he saw in rapid succession humanity's wars, its art, its